Marvin Harrison Jr. is one of the most heralded wide receiver prospects we've seen in some time. He comes from a legendary bloodline, and he was drafted into what appears to be a fantastic situation for him. However, with being a highly regarded prospect comes high expectations. What can we expect from Marvin Harrison Jr. in his rookie season? By the end of this video, you will have a good idea as to what we can expect from Marvin Harrison Jr. this season. Marvin Harrison Jr. is 6'3", 205 pounds, and while he is 22 years old at the start of this season, he is an early declare, meaning he came out as a junior. When we look at his metrics, his 4.46 40-yard dash is in the 78th percentile, and his 106.5 speed score, which is his height and weight adjusted speed, is 87th percentile. A couple other metrics to note: his 47.9% college dominator is 95th percentile. That's his market share of the total yards and touchdowns in the passing offense. Just think about that. Almost 50% of his team's yards and touchdowns were his. When we look at his college target share of 31.8%, that's 94th percentile. How do you get a large target share? You are a dominant player that deserves it. If you aren't a dominant player, you don't get a target share over 30%. When we look at his breakout age of just north of 20 years old, that's 60th percentile. One caveat to that: he went to Ohio State, so he had Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson before him, as well as JSN. When you go to a school like that, that's essentially a wide receiver factory, even if you're Marvin Harrison Jr., you do have to wait your turn. So for that to be the case and still immediately break out, that's very, very impressive. When we look at the reception perception profile for Marvin Harrison Jr. from Matt Harmon, when we look at the left chart, that's his route percentage chart. That charts out all of his total routes and attributes percentages as to how often each one of these routes in the stem was run. Well, he ran corner routes, dig routes, and slant routes at an above average rate. He ran 9 routes, post routes, comebacks, and curls at an average rate, and ran out routes, flat routes, and screens at a below average rate. When we look at the chart on the right, that's his success by route chart. Well, he was green, which means above average, in all but 2 routes, the comeback and the post. That is an elite chart. That means he is very, very successful at essentially any route that he performs. When we look at the blurb below, it says that he is 6'3", 209 pounds. He's a classic X wide receiver. That's true. He is generally going to be used on the line of scrimmage, a lot of times isolated by himself, because he doesn't need to be in a condensed formation or off the line of scrimmage to win. He can do that. He has absolute positional versatility. But when you have someone that is fully capable of being by themselves on the boundary and dominating, you do that. One thing to note: while he can do anything in the sense of he can be any position on the field in terms of wide receiver positions, he did line up 78.9% of the time as a boundary receiver. And that is how I believe the Cardinals in general are going to use him. When we dig further into MHJ, we really get to see how elite of a prospect he is, because he wins no matter what. When we look at his success rate versus man coverage, it's 83rd percentile, or 74% overall. He has an 80th percentile success rate against zone coverage, which was 83.2%, and he had a 78.7% success rate versus press coverage, which is 87th percentile. Another thing to note: on 16.8% of his routes, he was double covered. That is the highest that Matt Harmon has ever recorded. Teams knew exactly how talented he was, and it didn't matter in any way, shape, or form. There was nothing they could do to slow him down, let alone stop him. One thing to note: he did have a little bit of a drop issue in the sense of concentration drops. That is absolutely curable. If you remember back in the day, Jamar Chase had drop issues, and we all saw how much that affected him. You should not be worried in any way, shape, or form. Just because it's a little bit worse than Odunze and Neighbors, nothing to worry about. One thing that all elite receivers have in common is that they have a high targets per route run rate. That's the targets divided by how many routes in which you ran. As you can see, essentially all of these wide receivers are very, very good. You have Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, ASRB, Keenan Allen, Jalen Waddle, CeeDee, Puka, AJ Brown, and Michael Pittman Jr. You should expect Marvin Harrison Jr. to be very high on this list this season. In order to be a wide receiver 1 over the past 5 seasons, you need to have, on average, 144.6 targets, 97.4 receptions, 1,311 receiving yards, and 9.5 touchdowns. All right, do we think that's within MHJ's range of outcomes? Let's look into it. All right, you might be asking yourself, how am I going to go about ascertaining whether or not being a wide receiver 1 is within MHJ's potential range of outcomes? Well, I'm going to look at Kyler Murray's stats. As you can see, he played 16 games in his first 2 seasons, then 14, 11, and 8. What I'm going to do is extrapolate his stats as if he had played 17 games in each of his 5 seasons. I'm going to extrapolate his attempts, completions, yards, and touchdowns as if he had played 17 games in each of his 5 seasons. When we extrapolate Kyler Murray's 5-year career as if he had played 17 games in each season, he would have averaged 4,051 passing yards and 24 passing touchdowns. All right, so we figured out the Kyler Murray side of things. How are we going to figure out the MHJ side of things? Well, the last time that Kyler Murray had a dominant X wide receiver that was healthy, that was in 2020 with DeAndre Hopkins. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use DeAndre Hopkins' 2020 targets per route run rate, his percentage of completions, his percentage of yards, and his percentage of touchdowns from 2020 specifically. DeAndre Hopkins had a 29.4% target share the last time Kyler Murray had a dominant X wide receiver, which was 2020. When you extrapolate the stats as if Kyler Murray had played 17 games, he averages 4,051 passing yards and 24 passing touchdowns for his career. Using the target share, percentage of completions, percentage of yards, and percentage of touchdowns for Hopkins in 2020, while using the career averages for Murray, it would be reasonable to project MHJ to finish with 169 targets, 121 receptions, 1,417 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Now that we have everything we need to reasonably project what Marvin Harrison Jr. could do this season, how do his projected stats compare to the 5-year averages to be a wide receiver 1? And where would he have finished in 2023? Well, his 169 projected targets would easily beat the 5-year averages of 144.6. His 121 receptions would easily beat the 97.4 projected. His 1,417 receiving yards would easily eclipse the 1,311. However, his 6 projected touchdowns would fall short of the 9.5. Either way, he is beating the averages to be a wide receiver 1 in general in 3 of these 4 metrics. Now, where would he have finished in 2023? Well, using these stats, he would have been the wide receiver 4 in a full PPR and the wide receiver 8 in a half PPR. Now, will Marvin Harrison Jr. end up being a top 5 wide receiver in PPR? Will he be a top 10 wide receiver in a half PPR? We don't know, but it is absolutely within his range of outcomes. Well, there you have it. I think that Marvin Harrison Jr., who is a legendary wide receiver prospect, the son of a Hall of Famer, is poised to be a wide receiver 1 this season. He has absolutely sky-high expectations, and I think he's absolutely going to deliver right now. But what do you think? Do you think he's going to be a wide receiver 1 this year? Wide receiver 2? Let me know below in the comment section and let me know why. With that being said, I'm the Fantasy Football Strategist. Please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you and have a good day.